Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Going to do something different today, as you can see by hyperspace, just for fun. I want to thank the Vasa Law Firm in Sweden and all my Patreon supporters for helping this channel grow. Check the links in the description below for Patreon. So let's talk about Tesla India versus Tesla Brazil. Who's going to get a Gigafactory first, or who might never get a Gigafactory? South America, really important. South Asia, really important. Are you ready? Let's go! So it starts with Elon tweeting occasionally about India, including fairly recent tweets talking about how they want to bring cars to India. They may want to do a gigafactory in India. Elon's interested in India. Look, it's a big country. It's understandable why companies would want to do business in India, but that doesn't mean there aren't problems. Elon talks about some problems already. Import duties, the way they treat electric vehicles. He's hoping for some relief. They can't consider doing a Tesla Gigafactory in India until they've tested the market by selling cars in India, and they can't sell cars in India yet because India's made it too difficult to import vehicles. Maybe there's some hope for that in the future. That's being worked on. There was more news recently about Tesla making progress. They got approval for 4 models to be sold. They were talking to Indian parts makers about maybe working deals with them. I think this is still premature, but people are really excited about. We'll see where that goes. By contrast, there's not a lot of news from Brazil. You can see most of these articles are from 2020, and the 2021 article is not about any progress. There is some interest in Brazil in getting a Tesla factory, but so far we're not hearing anything new since February or March of 2020. So there's a long road to go. But is Brazil a more attractive market? One of the things to think about is, where's Brazil? Brazil is in South America over here. It's not just Brazil that's the market. If they make cars in Brazil, those cars made in Brazil will be exported to Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, Colombia, Peru. There's a lot of countries in South America. It's not just Brazil, but Brazil is by far the biggest market in South America. So we're going to look at Brazil, but keep in the back of your mind, well, who else is there? By contrast, here we have India. India is near a whole bunch of countries that are, generally speaking, even poorer than India. Pakistan and Bangladesh are very poor. Yeah, they're not that far from Thailand, but China's gigafactories are also not that far from Thailand and Vietnam and Cambodia. There's lots of potential for India to maybe export to those countries, but so can China. And Saudi Arabia, Iran's pretty poor. Saudi Arabia is wealthy, but it's not that big of a country. The car markets aren't that big. This is the fundamental problem with an Indian gigafactory, is it's just a fairly small car market, even though it's a big country with a big population, because they're poor, and that's what we're going to talk about. So you can see here that India has roughly double the economy of Brazil. Their GDP is around $3 trillion. Brazil's GDP is around $1.5 trillion. Depends who's measuring. The UN makes it a lot closer. There's 3 different columns here. There's the IMF, there's the United Nations, and there's the World Bank. The IMF numbers makes them farther apart. India is more than double the size. But if you look at the UN estimates and the World Bank estimates, it's a little bit closer. And then you have to add in what's not visible here is Argentina and the other Latin American countries that add to the market for India. So here you can see Latin American countries. You can see Brazil. Argentina's nearby, Colombia's nearby, Chile's nearby, Peru on the other side, but I think it's still nearby. Peru might be better served by California, but who knows? Ecuador. These are all countries that probably can be served by a Brazil gigafactory. When you add up their GDP, those additional 5 countries, there's more in Latin America, but those 5 countries in particular, when you add them up, they put Brazil's GDP a lot closer. The South American GDP ends up being a lot closer to India's GDP. And Pakistan and Bangladesh just don't have very large economies. They're even poorer than India, so I don't think they have to play a meaningful role, where Argentina and Colombia and Chile and Peru all have fairly wealthy economies. We're going to see this about Brazil. They're all, relatively speaking, as wealthy as Brazil or wealthier. So this is the really striking number about India. The GDP per capita is only $2,100 US. America's economy is much, much larger, something like $50,000 a year. They're very, very poor. They just don't have a lot of money. There's 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, but they're almost all grindingly poor, nowhere close to being able to afford a $25,000 Tesla, which is what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about them buying Model S's or Model X's or even Model Y's. It's this future vehicle that was revealed at Battery Day that they're hoping to get to $25,000. Even if they got it to $20,000, the market for that car in India is very, very small. We're going to talk about that. And this is a big contrast. In Brazil, the GDP per capita is like $8,700. It's like 4.5 times the GDP per capita of India. They're much wealthier. The average, even though Brazilians are much poorer than Americans, they're much wealthier than people in India. So the potential for upper middle class Brazilians to buy a $20,000 or $25,000 Tesla is much stronger than that potential in India. And we'll see more in a minute. This is a really striking graphic that gives you a sense of poverty in India. The red box on the left here is the share of the population in millions of people and millions of households that are the elites, the wealthiest in India. And it sounds like, wow, 7 million people in 2016 heading to 16 million households, not people. 7 million households in 2016 heading to potentially 16 million households in 2025. That sounds like a big number. Okay, well, first of all, there's no guarantee they're going to get to 16 million households in that elite category in 2025. COVID threw a real roadblock to all economies around the world. That's going to slow things down. And India's economy, India's bureaucracy has a history of making it difficult for their economy to grow. So this is a really optimistic assessment. But what does elite mean? That's an important detail here. So we have a description here. That elite households were those that earned more than $30,800 US annual income. $30,000 annual income, $31,000 annual income. Well, wait a minute. So if you have $30,000 in annual income for your household and you have to pay rent out of that, you have to pay food out of that, what's your potential for owning a $25,000 car or even a $20,000 car? The share of that 7 million or 16 million households that can still afford a Tesla, it's much lower than that. Think about in America, people who have $30,000 a year in income, you're barely above Starbucks. Starbucks barista, $15 an hour, 22,000 hours a year is $30,000 a year in income. You don't see a lot of Starbucks baristas buying Teslas. You need to have a substantial income to be able to afford a high-end car. And even at $25,000, even if you get it to $20,000, that's household income, not just individual income. You're going to need a much higher household income to be able to afford even a $20,000 Tesla if they manage to get the cost of that Tesla down to $20,000 in price to the customer. I think it's a stretch. Now let's talk about it from the perspective of total car sales. So in Brazil in 2019, I'm using the 2019 numbers because COVID messed up the numbers for all the countries. They sold about 2.3 million passenger cars plus about 400,000 light commercial vehicles. About 2.8 million vehicles was the total car market in Brazil. You can throw in trucks, buses, whatever, but it's in the ballpark of 2.8 million. And this is going to be a little off because Brazil and India might count differently, but let's see how India did. You can see here that this is from the India Times. Down here, you see they fell below the psychological 3 million mark. They did not manage to sell 3 million vehicles in India in 2019. They're at about the same number of sales, of car sales, as Brazil. Brazil sells nearly 3 million cars a year in 2019, and India sold near 3 million cars in 2019. Even though they have 4 or 5 or 6 times the population, they're so much poorer and they're so much more crowded that people tend not to buy cars. So this is a pretty striking detail right here, that the size of the Indian car market is not really bigger than Brazil, and the story gets worse for India. Let's look at the top selling vehicles in Brazil and India, and then let's compare them. So the top selling vehicle in Brazil in 2019 was the Chevrolet Onix, which I'm going to show you in a minute. You see some other vehicles, the Ford Ka, the Hyundai HB20, Renault Kwid, Volkswagen Golf. 7th position, the Fiat Strada. That's going to be the number 1 vehicle in 2021. We'll talk about that shortly. You can see that the Chevrolet Onix starts at around $10,400 as the base price for the least expensive Onix, and they have a wide variety of vehicles priced up to near $15,000. This is the best-selling vehicle in 2019, and they were approaching $15,000 US in base price, depending on the model, but really starting over $10,000 for the vehicle. This year, 2021 through May, the Fiat Strada has surged to be the top-selling vehicle in Brazil. You can see the Chevy Onix is still there, the Hyundai HB20, Volkswagen Gol. A lot of the same cars are still selling well, but that's the best-selling car is the Fiat Strada. Well, let's take a look at that. And you can see here the Fiat Strada is kind of a small pickup. It's got, it's a 4-door and it has a little bit of a bed behind it. This is the #1 selling vehicle in Brazil now. Let's see what that goes for. And you can see the base price is around $11,600 up to $14,000 something. So again, over $10,000 and approaching $15,000 in price for the Fiat Strada. What do vehicles sell for in India? India's car market is dominated by a joint venture between Maruti and Suzuki called Maruti Suzuki. And their top selling vehicle is the Suzuki Dzire. And then the Alto is another popular. You can see the Alto at the top. That's been a big seller for a long time, the Swift. And you can see these are all tiny cars. They're all tiny cars. That's what Indians can afford. So the Dzire, for example, sells for $8,000 as the starting price. That's $2,000 or $3,000 less than the best-selling vehicle in Brazil. You will see vehicles in India selling for as little as 4 lakh, which is $6,000, maybe less than $6,000 US. I think there are even vehicles going down as low as $4,000. But this is the best selling. And when you look at the sales in India, you tend to see vehicles selling $7,000, $8,000 starting price. You don't see a lot of vehicles getting much over $10,000. So what do we learn from this? The car market in India versus Brazil is about the same size in number of vehicles sold. But the Brazilian market, the cars that are sold are more expensive. So if Tesla's going to choose a place to sell cars, Brazil seems to me to be a more attractive place to sell cars than India. On top of that, Brazil can sell to Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. Their factory can deliver vehicles to the rest of Latin America where the language isn't identical. Brazil speaks Portuguese. The rest of Latin America mostly speaks Spanish, but it's not that far off. There's a lot of commerce between Brazil and the other countries in South America. It just seems like Brazil is a better choice. Now, the other side of that is Giga Texas. It's not that long of a trip to ship vehicles from Giga Texas down to South America. So maybe it makes sense to just grow Giga Texas. India's bureaucracy is a nightmare. It's very, very hard to set up a business, to run a business. They don't have the infrastructure. Latin America's had better, even though Latin America doesn't have great infrastructure by American standards, they have better infrastructure than India has. So my gut hunch is if I was in Tesla's shoes, I would be looking at Brazil before I'd be looking at India. Also, they have this question, is India's economy going to grow? Is it going to grow enough to justify building a factory there to support this? And maybe an Indian Gigafactory to do batteries or solar would make sense. India's very big on solar. They're very big on, and they have an unreliable grid, so a battery backup could make a big difference. I just think overall, even though Brazil, Argentina, you add South America up, their population is significantly less than the population of India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, if you want to add them in, much poorer countries. But in terms of the car market, in terms of the market, even for solar, even for batteries, South America seems to me a much better choice to focus on than India. Now, Tesla has a lot of people from India on their staff. India is a great place if you want engineers. There's a lot of very talented, hardworking engineers in India. I don't know if Brazil, Latin America has as strong an engineering talent base as India, so maybe there's hope in that sense. Maybe if you make them in India, you'll be able to get the cost further down. Although I would think the same principle would apply in Brazil. You'd be able to get cost down in Brazil as well. I'm not sure, but as I look at it, it makes more sense to me that Giga Brazil would make more sense than Giga India. That's an opinion. I don't know where to go with that. Where would you locate a factory in India? Hyderabad, Bangalore. There's a lot of car production in Chennai, so maybe Chennai would make sense. But overall, it's just a tough market. It's a very large country too. People have no sense of how big that country is. It doesn't look that big on a map when you look at it, but it's really, really big. Moving products from one part of India to another with their poor infrastructure is a challenge. Tesla Semi might not do well on their roads. How are you moving the cars from one place to another? A whole host of problems. Brazil, Latin America, probably better for those purposes. Now, I don't mean to be offensive to people from India. I love Indian food. I think it's a wonderful culture. But if I had to choose where do I want to be, I'd probably rather be at Giga Rio than at Giga Chennai or Giga Hyderabad. It's a hunch. I think that Brazil has its own set of problems. If I was choosing where I wanted to be, if I was a young engineer working in a factory, where would I want to be hanging out after the factory's closed? I think Rio is a lot more fun place to work. What I don't know is I think the work culture in India is probably more committed to hard work and long hours. And the reputation of Latin America is maybe they're not as hardworking, maybe they're not as committed to long hours. I think that reputation is probably undeserved. I think the Latin American engineers that I've met have been very hardworking, very motivated people. So I think there's a lot of potential for it to happen in Brazil. So my choice, I say Giga Brazil comes first. A lot of people who follow me think Giga India, whether it's Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, I don't know. I think it's a tough sell. Until India fixes its government, its bureaucracy, infrastructure, it's a real heavy lift to make Giga India work. But at the same time, you definitely see a lot of movement from Elon. He's talking about it. You know, you have a lot of people from India in high-ranking positions on Tesla's staff. I haven't seen a lot of Brazilians or Latin Americans taking important positions in the company at Tesla. So maybe that mitigates against it. I just don't know. My gut, Giga Brazil makes more sense. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Please check out this video where I talk about other potential places for a Gigafactory. Check out my other videos. Please support this channel on Patreon. Check out my locals channel and link below for me talking about politics if you're interested in that. And thank you so much for watching.